Months ago, Luis returned to the country, and while in the old family garden, he saw a woman playing on the swing. He instantly fell for this blind woman. Alice, thinking that the young man was her fiancé, mistook him for Henry. Luis, feeling a surge of excitement, thought to himself that his father must have called him back for a wedding. Since his fiancé was so tempting, he decided not to hold back. Alice got into the man's car, and then Luis received a call from his father, Alex. Alex asked about Alice's whereabouts, and Luis casually mentioned that he knew who the girl was. Alex, relieved, assumed his son was simply taking good care of his future niece-in-law. Once back at the house, Luis removed his outerwear and got ready to impress Alice with his cooking skills. Alice accidentally fell, and Luis rushed to catch her, anxiously helping her clean the wound. Alice, grateful for his help, sweetly said, "Thank you, brother." Luis was amused by the way she addressed him. As he showered, he thought, Alice is 22, I'm 31. Calling me brother isn't bad. It's quite interesting. After finishing his shower, Luis couldn't wait and kissed Alice deeply. The two spent a sweet 6 months together, and Alice's sight was finally restored. She eagerly looked forward to seeing her fiancé. However, when the blindfold came off, she saw a stranger's face. Alice was shocked, and at that moment, Luis realized she had mistaken him for his nephew, Henry. Luis sneered, thinking to himself, "You started this." Without caring about Alice's feelings, he kissed her forcefully, and they spent the night together in passion. Alice was at a loss, recalling her father's teachings. Her father had always taught her to keep her promises. When Alex helped bury her father, she had voluntarily agreed to become Henry's fiancé, and she felt obligated to keep her word. Luis, however, waited for Alice to calm down, feeling guilty about his actions. He planned to comfort her, but when he went to check on her, he found Alice standing on the balcony. Alice warned Luis not to approach, telling him she wanted to end their relationship and return things to how they were before. She then jumped off the balcony. However, Alice couldn't escape Luis's grasp. He intercepted her escape and carried her back home. Luis didn't like the cold look in Alice's eyes now. He preferred the version of her who was always smiling. He kissed her fiercely, and they spent the night together again. Unable to stop herself, Alice touched Luis's face. She had already developed feelings for him. Luis's attentive care over the past 6 months had deeply moved her. Luis caught her hand and asked, "Was it good last night?" Alice replied, "Luis, can this be the last time, please?" She couldn't defy her father's teachings. With a rational tone, she told Luis, "I am Henry's fiancé. What we are doing is wrong." But Luis wouldn't let her leave. Alex came to pick Alice up, but Luis wasn't having it. He had already made it clear to Alice in bed that she had to stay with him for another month, or else he would reveal the truth to Alex. So Alice turned down Alex's offer. At lunch, Alice noticed how Luis was always accommodating her. She remembered back when she was blind. She had to suppress her own desires and avoid bothering others. But Luis told her, "Alice, it's normal not to like certain foods. Please don't force yourself." Time had passed, and now Alice had to heartlessly reject all of Luis's kindness. Henry came to pick up his fiancée, Alice, and it was their first meeting. The moment Henry saw Alice, he fell for her at first sight. However, before they could spend much time together, Luis interrupted them. Without hesitation, Luis kicked Henry out, leaving the nephew puzzled by his uncle's cold attitude. This was the first time Luis had ever treated him this way. To win Alice's heart, Henry tried to visit her every day, bringing a different gift each time, but Luis always rejected him. Alice accepted Henry's gifts, which greatly angered Luis. When Alice slapped Luis in response, he kissed her forcefully. Just then, Henry arrived again to see Alice. Luis didn't mind being seen by his nephew at this moment of intimacy with Alice. The man asked Alice, "Choose him or me?" Alice, too afraid of being discovered, could only answer you. In the next moment, Henry entered Luis's home. He wanted to spend time with his fiancée but was met with Luis's refusal. Luis was disappointed in his nephew, especially since Henry had managed to ruin the family business. Luis couldn't be bothered to argue with someone so inexperienced, thinking, "What do you have to compete with me for?" After being scolded by his uncle, Henry became confused by Luis's attitude and secretly had someone investigate their relationship. Luis, concerned for Alice's well-being, took her to a boxing gym to clear her mind. He was confident he would eventually win her heart. To impress Alice, he deliberately showed off his muscles and then entered a match. Although Alice repeatedly said she wanted to keep her distance, she couldn't help but worry about him. When Luis came off the ring, she anxiously checked his injuries. Luis seized the opportunity to kiss Alice, and the moment was captured by a detective. Soon after, Henry received photos of Luis and Alice being intimate. Henry didn't believe Alice was at fault and thought Luis must have forced her. Determined to take Alice back from his uncle, Henry swore revenge. Luis took Alice shopping, unaware that Henry had bribed the staff at the clothing store. Alice, while trying on clothes in the fitting room, was startled when Henry suddenly appeared. He told Alice that he knew everything and was there to rescue her. Alice hesitated, torn. She told Henry that she still had 5 days left on her agreement with Luis and wanted to keep her word before leaving. Henry urged Alice not to be naive, warning her that Luis was ruthless. Alice then took off the token of affection Luis had given her and left with Henry. Alice's disappearance drove Luis into a frenzy. Soon, Henry was captured by Luis's men. For the first time, Luis pointed a gun at his own family. Terrified, Henry realized his uncle's true intentions. Luis, aware that his nephew was defying him, demanded Henry choose a way to settle this dispute. Henry chose a boxing match. The uncle and nephew engaged in a brutal fight, with Henry taking a heavy beating. Luis found Alice and, to teach the runaway girl a lesson, he showed her Henry's miserable state. Alice scolded Luis for his shamelessness, accusing him of being so ruthless to his own nephew. Luis replied, "The moment he took you away from me, we were nothing but rivals in love, no longer family." He then deliberately kissed Alice in front of Henry. At that moment, Henry's hatred for Luis reached its peak. Luis carried Alice to the bed and kissed her passionately. He then took out the token of affection and placed it back on her. They spent the entire night in passion. When Alice woke up, she noticed a red string tied around her wrist, with a pipa, Chinese lute, attached at the other end. This made her happy. Luis told Alice that he remembered everything she liked. When she was still blind, they had passed by a music store, and he had sworn to heal her eyes and give her the pipa she loved. Alice played a piece of music for Luis, and after that, Luis pulled her into his arms, sighing, "Why can't we just be like ordinary lovers? I'm only Henry's second uncle, and we have no blood relation." Alice knew she loved Luis, but she couldn't break her vow. She had sworn to Alex that she would marry Henry, and if she broke it, she'd face divine punishment. Just then, thunder rumbled outside, and Luis, unfazed, swore in front of Alice, "In this life, I will love only you. I am willing to bear the consequences of your broken vow 100-fold." Alice kissed Luis, and he suggested that the next day, they should confess everything to Alex. However, Alice hesitated and tried to take her own life, unable to face Alex. Fortunately, Luis saved her just in time, kissing her angrily. Luis was furious that Alice didn't cherish her own life. For the first time, he got angry in front of her. Worried about her potential self-destructive behavior, he chose to work late to avoid further upsetting her. When Luis returned home, he found a bowl of dumpling soup. He reminisced about their past, especially when Alice was still blind. She had clumsily made the soup for him. Luis went to Alice's room to thank her, knowing that she loved him all along. Alice softened and told Luis to give her some time. She would eventually face Alex. As soon as Luis and Alice returned to the old house, they were suddenly greeted by a child clinging to Luis's leg, calling out "Dad." Luis didn't recognize the mother and child, quietly observing the scene. Bess cried pitifully, claiming that she had a child with Luis after a one-night stand abroad. Henry added fuel to the fire, saying, "Uncle, this child looks so much like you." Alex scolded them, stopping the farce. Before a paternity test could be done, the mother and child were allowed to stay in the old house. Luis swore his loyalty to Alice, declaring that she was the only woman he would ever love. Fortunately, Alice believed him. The troublesome child tried to take over Alice's room and even falsely accused Alice of pushing him. Louise didn't hold back, exposing the poor acting of the mother and child. Bess, too scared to anger Louise, took the child and left. Later that night, Bess entered Henry's room, revealing that she was the woman Henry had slept with while studying abroad, and the child was Henry's. Henry, aiming to ruin Louise, had deliberately brought Bess and her child home to frame Louise. Following Henry's orders, Bess climbed into Louise's bed, but before she could make a move, Louise kicked her off the bed and threw her out of the room. Alex received the paternity test results, which confirmed that the child was Louise's biological son. Louise remained calm. With a single order, his bodyguards brought the doctor to him. The doctor was trembling in fear as he revealed the recording in which Henry had bribed him to falsify the paternity test. The real father of the child was Henry. Alex was furious and ordered the mother and child, along with Henry, to be sent abroad. Their family would not tolerate offspring who could tarnish their reputation. Finally, Alice's engagement to Henry was annulled. However, Henry had one last trick up his sleeve. He sent photos of Louise and Alice in intimate situations to Alex. Upon seeing his father's enraged reaction, Louise immediately kneeled and begged for his forgiveness. He confessed to Alex that he and Alice were in love. Alex was furious, chastising Louise for deceiving a young girl at his age. He used the family's disciplinary methods to harshly punish Louise. Alice, worried that Louise might be hurt, rushed to protect him and was struck with a lash herself. Eventually, Alex fainted from anger. When Alex regained consciousness, he saw his son and Alice kneeling before him, pleading for forgiveness. In the end, Alex softened, but he demanded that Louise take on the family business and take responsibility for Alice. At last, the couple could openly be together. Louise proposed to Alice. That night, he pressed her onto the bed, and they spent the night passionately. The next day, Alice, feeling a little unwell, went to the hospital for a checkup, only to discover that she was pregnant with twins. Louise was overjoyed, behaving like a child. A year later, a pair of twins, boy and girl, ran towards Alex. They were Louise and Alice's children. Alice returned to the old house, where she noticed that the swing in the garden had not been dismantled. She remembered the first time she met Louise there. This time, Alice was no longer blind. She knew clearly that she loved the man before her. Alice believed that their meeting was destined by fate.